Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Max Q. So, very thankful to have all of you here for the podcast. I have a great guest today. It is Paul Byrne. He is the president of Rezoio, a very, very cool company, but he has an amazing history. He's had worn a lot of hats for large companies and then also been a founder. And so, excited to have him here today to talk about his story, kind of some tips and tricks, and we'll always end with what are we reading, which is always one of my favorite questions. So, with that, Paul, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Paul Byrne, and I am the president of Rezoio. We are a software consultancy and development firm, and we write software for both the e-commerce world and custom web application and SaaS platforms. And kind of got into that business via the e-commerce side of things. We began customizing e-commerce stores for mid-tier merchants and kind of continued that business and grew it. Now it's evolved quite a bit. Now the platforms are very different from when we started really in earnest about 14 years ago. And about 5 years ago, we branched off and we started doing the custom development, so web applications, SaaS platforms, and we've done that for a number of companies that have either gone from being a consultancy to a highly scalable um, SaaS platform where their users who were previously accessing the system through a consultant relationship and email and so forth. So one of these was with business intelligence. We've also created custom CRM for the same kind of industry group, and done a number of custom platforms of that type.
That's good. Thank you. And I would love for you to tell them the backstory. So I feel like I got a little bit of this before the podcast started. So I think it's good to share just kind of like where you came from and what your founder journey looks like.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Actually, I'll mention something I didn't mention before, which was I was born in Kansas. So I'm from Wichita, Kansas originally. And I ended up going to graduate school and getting my master's degree in Milan, Italy. And from there, I joined a German company that was beginning to open up affiliates throughout Europe because the borders were coming down. It was a really pretty exciting time, but I was traveling around Europe and either acquiring companies for them or helping them set up new companies or developing new, sort of owner partnerships with the companies that we had in, Italy and Spain and the UK and so forth. And I ended up in France because that company needed someone to head up marketing, and also they were kind of looking to have like a second option there as a number two guy. And so the local president of that company that we acquired, I kind of became his right hand man, but I was also kind of the mole in the company for the Germans. If you can say that you put a mole in a company you own. But that lasted for a few years, and I was recruited by PepsiCo, and they brought me back to the States. And I worked in the headquarters of Pizza Hut for a while, and at Frito-Lay. So I kind of changed divisions there within PepsiCo. But I was there for about 5 years and got the itch to sort of join some friends who had a mid-sized advertising agency who were doing some interesting things with database marketing. I had been the head of database marketing at Pizza Hut. And so it gave me a chance to get involved, and that was really my first exposure to the internet. Then I became the chief marketing officer for a company called the Smart Circle
Mhm.
and spent about 7 years there. I helped them establish an e-commerce presence. And then
So
one
you've
day,
always been really focused on e-commerce, even before the E was in the commerce, because you're starting businesses, right? So then they added the
yeah,
E and you became.
yeah. So we're talking about the late 2000s before 2010. Like I think I left, I guess 2009 was when I left the Smart Circle. And I was kind of slowly introduced as the industry was evolving. So we had been doing cold calling from some data entry off of receipts. that we were doing for the Smart Circle. And then we started doing email marketing, and we bought a server and had no idea what we were doing, and like installed some software on there, and I'm sure, just got flagged for spam left and right. But it was successful. We eventually put up a website so that we were no longer, our initial email was call us to buy this thing that we were selling, right? And we would take people's credit cards online and ship out the product. But I mean, and that's, there was a Wild West back then. I remember I had
Those
a,
NFTs, right? I mean, I feel like you could like get some of those like original first emails and like frame them, like the first LinkedIn influencer post, right?
yeah, yeah, no, and we weren't hackers, we weren't selling, hair loss drugs and Viagra and stuff like that. We were selling this products of the Smart Circle, but there were a lot of companies were just not transacting online. So what we were doing was, for a mid-sized company like ours, was kind of sophisticated, I guess. But that was how I got involved in it initially, and I became so. I guess you probably wanted me to talk about rage quitting because this is the
Yeah, I
point.
mean, that was great. Earlier, I heard that. I think it's good for everybody just to like you feel that it's cathartic.
Sure, sure. I became very frustrated with that job, and in hindsight, I just wasn't doing what I wanted to do, which was causing me a lot of job frustration. And it could be a pretty stressful environment, but a lot of companies are pretty stressful. And so, during a meeting where I was kind of getting raked over the coals by my boss, uh, that, it was an online meeting. So, back then I think we used GoToMeeting. And, I just was like, this is enough, So I hung up. I just quit the call, and I turned around, sent my boss an email, and I said, "Hey, I'm done. I'm out. Thanks for the great time." And by the way, we're still good friends.
Well, that's
But
good. That's good to know.
yeah, but let's just say the relationship. I put a strain on the relationship with that action, which we eventually overcame. And and so I left that job, and it allowed me to become an entrepreneur. I would say the most challenging part of that experience was, as soon as I sent that email, I kind of, got up. I actually had to give somebody a ride to the airport who was visiting. And so on the ride to the airport and then home, I had to figure out, what I was going to tell my wife, who
Right.
was not, I guess unsurprisingly, was not a big fan of that move. But but she's a big fan of me, right? So, it did not cause problems. She trusted me, and I knew, I had to come through for the family. Unfortunately, I had some money saved up, and I had a little flexibility that I could work with. So, I got involved in this business that was doing data entry for a wide variety of companies, including the company I worked with before. And we started selling their products online, first by calling people off
Hmm.
of the receipts that they allowed us to use, the data from the receipts that they had. And then we eventually started selling via email and having them call us. And then eventually we set up a website, started selling online. And it was a great experience. It helped me understand all the different components of e-commerce and how things work, and just the basic concepts of that. And so eventually that part of the business went away. It was kind of dependent on getting information from the data entry, which was the other side of our business that we were doing. And as you can imagine, like, that business has decreased substantially. OCR, optical character recognition, was coming online at that time, et cetera. So we knew that was going away. But uh, I ended up working with eBay,
Oh, okay.
because we had become one of their largest merchants, not through eBay, but through Pro Stores, which was their e-commerce platform. So essentially, the shopping cart. And we introduced, they kind of said, "Hey, we like what you're doing." We had a conversation, and they asked me to set up the inbound sales team for them. So we were doing pre-sale service. So when you called Pro Stores, the phone number, our phone rang, and I had guys doing that. And we started realizing that these merchants needed all kinds of assistance that
Mhm.
it wasn't really in our contract. And we asked if we could help the merchants under a different name. And that's really when the name Rezoio was born, which was around 2011.
Okay.
And that became our name for doing business with these merchants. And we just kept adding on more and more services,
Mhm.
and eventually got in, within a year, I got into software development, and were providing technical services for them, and really fell in love with that side of the business. And for years, for the first like 7 or 8 years, we were basically focused on helping merchants. Uh,
Mhm.
and then after that, we got into this custom development where we're doing the web application development
Yes.
and the SaaS
And
platform.
focused on e-commerce shops too, right? I mean, that's important. I wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so, a little bit about the e-commerce shop. So yeah, we have two parts of our business, and the e-commerce side of the business is one that has evolved very quickly. And it's one that we've had clients that were mid-tier businesses for the most part. Now we do we did and we continue to work with some Fortune 500 companies, but for the most part, we're dealing with mid-tier merchants. So, they have a team of maybe 5 people, seven
Right.
people,
Right.
maybe 10, who are working on the e-commerce side of their business. And I would say about half of them are B2B. So, they're selling directly either products or services to other companies. And that side of the business is very complex. And that's kind of how we got into our own custom development is you have one of the things that you want to do, if you have a large inventory or fast moving inventory, is you need to integrate your front end with
Mhm.
your ERP system. And it's amazing how many companies either don't do that or do that poorly. Like in the early days, we ran into people and we were saying, like, what's your integration mechanism? Well, it's Marge over there and she's got a
Yeah,
yellow
the Excel
notepad,
spreadsheet. Yeah.
right? She pulls a report every day, and we update inventory in our e-commerce. And I was like, oh my
That
gosh, like,
actually gives me a lot of anxiety just thinking about it.
yeah, it gave me a lot of anxiety too, and I would always tell them, well, we can do better than this. And Marge can probably be spent like doing a lot more, productive tasks than keeping up with her legal pad.
She's probably be
And
happy too. I doubt she wants to be there checking off
yeah,
numbers and tallying, right?
yeah, yeah. And I don't know of us like getting anybody fired or any positions being eliminated because, once you help companies overcome bottlenecks, I mean, you're really helping them to scale. And so as they scale, they have bigger and better jobs for people. And so
Right.
that was our experience.
Dig in a little bit on this because I think
Yeah.
this is something that a lot of founders maybe struggle with or are starting to think through is you really found your niche. And it sounds like you didn't have this grand plan of like, this is where I wanted to end up. It's kind of like you went where the need was.
Mhm.
And can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, how that felt, how you kind of settled on like, this is what we're building and it became successful?
Yeah, like you said early on, we were just kind of reacting to the market. But within a few years, I would say, by the time I'd been in business for 5 years or so, I started to have um, just some insight from the marketplace from being there. And I
Right.
could see which way things were going. We could see that SaaS was taking over on the e-commerce side. We could see movements that companies were making or getting ready to make just because we were active in the marketplace and we sort of knew what people's roadmaps were. And I started saying, I really need to align my roadmap with their roadmap if I want to build this business. And yeah, which has allowed us to essentially triple the size of the company in the last 6 years.
Mhm.
And the and for a services business, that's a pretty quick rate, right?
Mhm.
Um, but but I've seen that the biggest problems for scaling is one, kind of not knowing where you're going.
Right.
But scaling kind of follows these laws, and software has to be scalable as well. And I kind of look at it from, you know, a software developer's perspective to a certain extent. And that software developer's perspective is I'm always looking to eliminate or anticipate and eliminate bottlenecks.
Hmm.
And so scaling is all about kind of starting to break down walls before you get to them.
Hmm.
And so from a software perspective, it has everything to do with your stack, what services you're using, how you're hosting, all of those things. But I think that, the once companies get that product market fit,
Right.
which, some companies will try to scale before they have that. And they'll have a product and, a technical product, or, even, let's say a consultancy or whatever, but they
Hmm.
really haven't validated it with the market. And so they'll spend a lot of money trying to validate. And what happens is, like, you spend a lot of money bringing, people into the top of the funnel, but it turns out that nobody makes it to the bottom of the sales funnel.
Right. Right.
And so that's like one of the challenges of scaling, figure out, okay, I need my funnel to have a good shape. And the only way to do that is really validating your product or your service with the marketplace.
Hmm.
And the second thing is you want to invest in some management.
Mm.
Um, Probably be a little bit ahead of where you think you need to be, but hire the big positions first. um, you may be good at really building a team, but if you're spending all of your time building a team and then expecting to hire somebody to manage that team, you're you're kind of you're expecting somebody to come on board that is going to potentially not be a good fit with the people that you have, and you're going to end up swapping people out from that team. So you're much better off of saying, look, I know I'm going to need a sales team. I'm going to need like 5 to 7 people in 2 years. Hire the management first and make them do the work, right? But
Hmm.
also have them be a heavy part of the recruiting process and building that team. So, as the entrepreneur, you want to be on top of that team and getting a little bit ahead of it. Now, you're going to have to wear, you know, 5 or 6 hats in the
Hmm.
beginning, but I call it like giving away the hats. You want to give the hats away,
As soon as
one
you
at a
can.
time, right? To somebody that can really help you scale. And of course, financial management's a big part of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Got to keep enough of your powder dry, and that goes back to the product market fit. If you spend all your money on advertising, but you're not bringing any sales in, you've just killed your runway. And you're going to need runway. You're going to need 6 to 9 months ahead, to be able to continue to scale your product, because you really have two choices at that point. One, you can either get really, really good at um you can get really, really good at raising money,
Hmm.
or you can figure out a better conversion, and so you can start making more money, but really
Hmm.
that's it. And from my point of view, if you're a founder and you want to keep control of your business,
Right.
like, raising money is a full-time job.
It is.
And I don't want to be in that business. I
Well, and
don't
if
think.
you're in that form of biz dev, you're not doing biz dev for your company, right? And it's
Right.
exhausting.
Right. And you'll probably have to hire a CEO to manage the business at that point.
Hmm.
And then I would say, like, but as you scale, the thing that keeps your company scalable is one, you know, not only bringing people down in the funnel, but keeping them in the family. And
Yeah.
you definitely want to create a lot of feedback loops. If you're in a consultancy, you want to understand why your customers are leaving, and figure out like how you can overcome those things. And not everybody will do it, but exit interviews, even somebody who's angry at you, like, they may want to vent, right? And that's a great time to learn about, like, oh, here's what we screwed up on this customer, right?
Want
So
to
I
avoid
think,
other people rage quitting.
yeah, you don't want your customers to rage quit. Like, that's a bad move, right? but also like you want to kind of tamp down churn of every kind, employees, customers, even vendors, right? You want to kind of build stability as much as possible. Uh, you're going to have to make changes like as you grow, like that's going to happen, but you want to keep it to, a reasonable amount because change has a cost. And so spend your change money on changes that make a difference.
I like that. Spend your
Yeah.
change money. That's good. I hadn't heard that before. That's a good saying. I like that.
Yeah.
I
So, I mean, that's kind of it. And then, from my standpoint, like we're focused on balancing your use of technology. So don't you can set up a great system and use all state of the art stuff, but if you have systems that have to communicate a lot, you're gonna create a lot of bottlenecks. So you really have to balance that technology implementation. And unless you're a tech person yourself, and even if you are, you're probably gonna need somebody like Rezoio that has a team that can go in and kind of evaluate where you want to move with that, and just get ahead of the curve.
Mhm.
So
No, thank you for that. No, this was really helpful. Honestly, I feel like we could probably talk for another hour. So, everybody in the audience, I'm going to try and grab Paul to be on one of our office hours. I'll talk to him after this. I'm surprising him
absolutely.
with it right now on the podcast, but I think there's a wealth of knowledge here. And honestly, you've done marketing, sales, you've been a founder, you've been a CEO. I mean, all of the things. And I think that's really valuable for everybody. I've already feel like I've learned a lot just listening to this. And since we do try to keep these short and sweet, I would love to finish up with our ending question,
Okay.
which is what are you currently reading? We always end with that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I read a lot of tech books, but I'm actually currently reading Software as a Science,
Oh, okay.
which is a book that's produced by SAS Academy. And yeah, it's very insightful about and you want to talk about scalability, these guys are all about scalability.
I love one more time. The title is SAS as a Science,
Software as a Science.
Software as a Science. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. This was fantastic. I mean, talking about scalability, talking about growth, and you actually, I feel like, wove in quite a few practical tips too that people can take away, from this and kind of implement and think through. And if they wanted to connect with you after this, how can they do that?
Absolutely. There are two great ways to do that. So one is through LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn I'm /PWBYRNE, PW Byrne. And then if you just go to Razoyo.com and go to the contact page and say, hey, I heard Paula on Mollie's podcast, and I want to, I want to talk to the guy I heard on Max Q.
Yeah,
They'll know who that is. They'll get it to me. So
sounds great.
those are the best ways to get in touch with me. And I would love to talk to any buddy that's starting a business, and see how we might collaborate.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll link everything in the description of the video too for everybody after this. Thank you so much, Paul. It was a pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Mom.